Okay, we're going to take a step back a little bit and try to give you a sense of where wolves are. So with that, let's go to our first slide. And we can turn down the lights a little bit. Thank you. Just want you to take a breath away from where you are today and think about where they live. These wolves are coming in a beautiful place where backwoods in Idaho, we have one of the largest contiguous wilderness areas in the lower 48 states. And imagine being a wolf pack in those woods, and the moon is rising, the crickets are chirping, there's birds, there's owls hooting, and you're standing there on land where wolves haven't existed in 80, almost maybe 100 years, because wolves have been driven to complete eradication in the western United States. So as a college intern, that's where I was, standing there looking for wolves in a place where they may or may not be, but we were getting updates from people that were in the backcountry that they thought that they saw tracks, or they thought that they saw herd wolves in the distance. And we would map those and try to go out and find some evidence that wolves were there. And every time, it was just a ghost story. Until one night when I was standing on a bridge, or near a bridge, and there was a river close by. Not the best place to howl because it limits your ability to hear something back. And I howled, and it was a place called the Frank Church Wilderness Area. And nothing. And thought, okay, we struck out again. So I went back to my tent, started putting it up, and suddenly the woods were just filled with this amazing sound. The moon was rising. Right behind them, they started talking to each other, and they howled right to the spot that I had been standing a half hour prior to that. I was stunned. It's not coyotes. It's not dogs. There's no one else around. And they're howling right to the spot that I'd been standing a half an hour before. Finally, I grabbed my tape recorder, and through the tears of frustration of so many years of looking for these animals, here they were. And they howled, and I started howling back to them. Not that I planned on, just that I wanted to. And the deepest male voice, I think, in the pack, and we howled back and forth with each other for what seemed like, I don't know, otherworldly time standing still. And as he would howl and his voice would lower, my howl would come in at the end, and then as I was losing or lowering my howl, finishing it, he would start. And we went back and forth. And it was just magical. To think that these animals were back in a place where they hadn't been for such a long time, that humans had completely wiped them out. Well, a week later, we found one of the female wolves from that pack in Bear Valley, and we wouldn't have found her except for that she'd been poisoned by a neurotoxin that is supposed to treat wheat fields, and there wasn't a wheat field 50 miles away. But the rest of the pack we never heard from again. It was like going back to when wolves were eradicated across the western United States. And we knew then that this intentional killing required more protection for them. And so 4 years later, I was to serve on the wolf reintroduction team for Canada and the United States. And we brought wolves back under the full protection of the Endangered Species Act, where they had radio collars and tracking devices that we were able to monitor them all the time and be able to watch where they were going across Idaho and Yellowstone and the Rockies, and see how they went out together and then found each other, created packs. And by that spring, both the wolves in Yellowstone National Park and in Idaho were having pups on the ground, and that was in 1995, 1996, so 20 plus years ago. And now we have 1,500 wolves across the region, and they're not just in Idaho or Montana. and Wyoming. They're now spreading to to Oregon and Washington and even California, which I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime, but it's happening. And so this is just an example of how you can bring back a species, even one that is misunderstood and hated as much as wolves, and work with people on the ground. And that's really the next step of what happened, is because even though the wolves were so successful, they still were facing very strong pushback from the people who lived in those communities near where they were at. And in the West, a lot of livestock is raised on national public lands. And so these communities depend on those national public lands in order to raise cattle and to raise sheep. And as soon as wolves started killing cattle again, you know, if they'd been gone for such a long time, this was the reason that they were wiped out to begin with, is people didn't want them threatening their livestock. And so our job then became looking for solutions with the ranchers who were on the ground, trying to help them understand what they could do to protect their livestock better from wolves and even other native predators by using these non-lethal tools, or helping them to avoid having losses in the first place. So this was our challenge, was to meet them out there on the landscape and to talk to them about how we could install fences, or how we might help them keep from attracting wolves by removing carcass pits, which they've been leaving out. And wolves are scavengers as well as predators. So, you know, for us, our brain is set up to interpret smell. It's about the size of a pea. With a wolf's brain, it's about the size of your fist. So they can smell carrion from a very long way away, and helping clean those carcass pits up was a huge step forward in trying to reduce the conflicts that were occurring. But even then, what we were told is that even though it would work on places like this small farm over in eastern Oregon, where there was a huge carcass pit back behind here, probably 200 dead livestock, and the wolves had come in from the mountains back behind, and they had come to this carcass pit, and they made the same decision you and I would make, right? They get to this big dead carcass pit full of slimy smelling stuff, and then there's spring lambs right here. So their choice was to go for the spring lambs, which I think I would have made that decision too. But what we were being told by the Fish and Wildlife Service and all the wolf scientists that we were working with from around the world is that you can do that kind of thing on a small grazing operation, but you can't do it on a large one. And so we were getting back to the point where, okay, but most livestock and most conflicts with wolves occur on large grazing operations. If we can't use those tools there, really they're not that effective. We're going to go back to this again if we're not careful. And so what we found is that if these livestock are occurring across the landscape like this, that we were going to have to find a way of adapting these tools to work in that big landscape. And we did. We started 10 years ago. And it actually started off as a train wreck. We had the sheep brought in, several thousand sheep brought in to the same meadows where wolves were denning. And they let the sheep out, they dispersed out, and then the wolves were denning right back over there. And of course, within a day, wolves had heard the livestock guardian dogs, which they know are strange-looking wolves. And strange-looking wolves are the biggest threat to their pups. And so they came out at night with the dogs barking. They killed a dog, they killed a bunch of sheep, and in normal conditions, that meant that that pack had a death sentence, that they wouldn't survive because the government would come in and kill those wolves. But what had happened is that the local community had fallen in love with these wolves. They had watched them raise their pups at this den site, they had given them a name, and they didn't want the wolves killed, so they asked them for a second chance. And we were able to give that by going out and teaching the ranchers about things like fladry, which had come from Poland. Originally, it was used to help hunters kill wolves, but we adapted it to be a livestock protection device. And so wolves were denning in that meadow right there, and they were denning there for over a month, with the sheep being there in the valley, and we didn't have any more losses, no more conflicts. And for the rest of that grazing season, that worked. And we started monitoring wolves and determining where they were and what packs we were working with that were there in that project area. And we started off at about 100 square miles, and we're at 1,000 square miles right now, and covering far more land than we thought we would. We have between 10 and 22,000 sheep in our project area every year from June through mid-October. And what we're learning through all of this is that, yeah, wolves can coexist with livestock across big open ranges, as mountainous as they are, if you use the right approach, if you're working on solutions, trying to keep wolves' sense of risk elevated near the livestock so that they stay onto their natural prey and focus on that rather than focusing on the livestock itself. And it really isn't that hard. We've come up with a lot of different devices, some of which are kind of new technology, but like using livestock guardian dogs. We know that we don't want to use them in the spring when it's close to a wolf's den, because they will get very defensive and attack the dogs. But if you use them any other time of year and you use multiple dogs, then you're going to be okay, because they think that's a strange pack and they don't want to mess with the strange pack. So these devices have been really helpful for us. And they've been really helpful for the sheep, because in the last 10 years, out of all those thousands and thousands of sheep that are out there, we've lost 30 completely, about 3 a year, which is the lowest loss rate of sheep on public lands in wolf range in the western United States. And wolves kill more sheep than they do anything else. So we took the hardest case scenario and we made it work. And if we can make it work there, we can make it work anywhere. So we have wolves across the range. Not a single wolf in our project area has been killed because of conflicts, which if you go right next to us in the adjacent project area, they've killed packs of wolves over there, and they've spent more money than we have killing wolves, and they're not using the non-lethal like we are. So it's more expensive for them. They're losing more livestock, and they're killing wolves, which disrupts the whole system. We come from a community where people really care about their natural heritage, but they also care about their agricultural heritage. We actually have a parade every year and bring the sheep right down the middle of downtown. So we got bagpipers out there. The priest comes out and blesses all the sheep. People love them, and that's great. But they can coexist with wolves, and they love the wolves too. And that's a pretty unique part of our community. These are some of the guys that I work with. I wish they were here. Commissioner Schoen, Brian Bean, who's the sheep manager, some of our one of our herders, and then a scientist from University of Spain. And we've been bringing people out to the field. We do trainings every year for folks that are now being presented in other areas where they're developing models like this Wood River Wolf Project. I just heard from folks in Estonia a few days ago. It's just going everywhere. And we're able to communicate and network and share these devices with them and these strategies, and then learn from them as well, which is what we've been doing all along. Thank you.